Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. From time to time, you and I have experiences which are so inspiring or maybe troubling, certainly transforming, that they become a frame, a new frame for all our other experiences afterwards. On many levels, my life gives me those experiences every day. I think God is sending those experiences into our life every day. On one level, it's the issue of whether or not we are aware of how phenomenally God is working in our lives. And then there really are those intense experiences that seem to have some additional power. I'm thinking now of what I've talked about from this pulpit already, but want to emphasize a little more today, which is a conversation I had in my office with Father Gregory Boyle of Homeboys Industries, the largest gang intervention program in the world. The organization that has as its motto, "Nothing stops a bullet like a job." Greg, who's a friend of mine and a friend of this community, met in my office with two other friends, Muslim leaders in this case, leaders in the moderate Muslim movement in the U.S., Dr. Maher Hathout and Salam Al-Mariyati. Maher and Salam had asked us to introduce them to Greg Boyle so that they could explore any connections there may be between what leads a young person to join a gang and what leads a young person to become a violent Muslim extremist. This conversation was so transformative for me and has such potential to transform, I think, our community, that they have agreed to expand that conversation that they had in my office and have it here at All Saints in a public setting. On Sunday evening, June 30, we're inviting police enforcement officers, law enforcement officers, we're inviting educators, the media, and all of us, so that the richness of what these leaders know and how they're yearning for a change can be shared with us. The central message in this thing that's helping to reframe my perspective on all of life has to do with hope. Greg Boyle, the gang interventionist, Jesuit priest, says no hopeful kid joins a gang. And we discussed in my office whether it is also the case that no hopeful kid becomes a violent extremist. To use Greg Boyle's words, what we are combating in America is a lethal absence of hope. Now, as I've been incorporating that into my framework for understanding the troubles assailing the human family, I have been praying these lessons this week, assigned for our reflection this morning. They are stories about two widows. The Hebrew word for widow is a picture word meaning desolate place. These are stories about the fact that in first century Palestine, a widow had no means of support, and these two widows whose sons are now dead are doubly desolate, a lethal absence of hope. And then toward the end of the week, 2 days ago, here in Santa Monica, a young man on the day before his 24th birthday armed himself and went on a rampage in Santa Monica, killing 4 victims, a young man who armed himself with a semi-automatic rifle and may have had up to 1,300 rounds of ammunition in loaded, high-capacity magazines. A lethal absence of hope. Now, what's the intervention? What's Jesus' intervention? Well, when you and I look at the gospel lesson this morning, trying to find the turning point in the story, it is clear as you continue to reflect on it that the moment when things change is when, according to our contemporary translation we're using this morning, when Jesus' heart breaks. The Greek word here is often translated compassion. Jesus had compassion. That too is a picture word in Greek, meaning having an experience of being moved at the level of your guts or your spleen. And the Hebrew word talks about a movement in your womb, a heart broken open. I find that to be an excellent expression for what it means when transformation is about to happen. The gospel writer for this morning, Luke, was actually a physician. He wrote the 3rd and the 5th books in the New Testament. He was very concerned about healing, and actually the healing and miraculous and transformative power of compassion, of having your heart broken open. For instance, when he talks about Jesus feeding the multitudes, the turning point in the story is not the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, but the turning point is first when Jesus looked at the crowd and had compassion for them. His heart was broken for them. And my 2 favorite parables of the entire New Testament take place in Luke, and they're compassion parables. One is the parable of the Prodigal Son, and the other is the parable of the Good Samaritan. You'll remember that the Prodigal Son, a second born, took prematurely his division of the inheritance. He was sick and tired of the self-righteousness of his older brother. My younger brother has told me he certainly understands what was going on in the family system there. He got the hell out of Dodge, spent all that money, wound up poor, homeless, eating with the pigs in the pigsty, came to himself, came to his true self, worked out his accounting speech, started going home to his daddy. And his father saw him on his way, and his heart broke. And ran out and greeted his son. Didn't even let him make his speech. Said, "You're back home." Put a ring on his finger, new cloak on him, killed the fatted calf. Annoyed even further the self-righteous firstborn. The second story about the Good Samaritan, a man beaten and left half dead on the side of the road, and all these officious, busy priests passed him by on the other side. But who stopped? The Good Samaritan, whose heart broke when he saw him, and went and touched him. Like Jesus touched this coffin with his child. And like Elijah touched that child, putting his entire body on top of him. When your compassion is flowing, you have got healing energy in you, according to Luke's gospel. And whoever you touch in an appropriate, healing, effective way, you can heal them and raise them from the death they are living. I was a huge fan of Margaret Mead's, the great anthropologist. She died a few years ago. I got to be with her once at the University of Michigan. I was on a continuing education event. Margaret Mead was 5 feet tall, and she carried around a staff that some tribal warriors had given her, I think, in Papua New Guinea, and it was bigger than she was, and she kind of used it to go through life. And she was a great mind. And in this University of Michigan event, she made a speech, and then she sat down and said, "Are there any questions?" And this brilliant, articulate young co-ed who was an anthropology major got up to ask Professor Mead a question, and she went on and on and on for about 5 minutes, and Dr. Mead, Margaret Mead, stomped her foot and tapped her cane, and she says, "My dear, are you here to ask a question or make a speech?" She also got in an argument with the bishops of the Episcopal Church. She was on the committee that passed the baptismal ritual that we have in our prayer book. And there came a point about, do you renounce Satan and all the forces of evil that surround us? And the bishops said, we can't put Satan in the prayer book because that's not going to make sense to the 21st century mind. We're doing this in 1980, but we've got to think about the future. And she stomped her foot and tapped her cane, and she said, "The bishops may not believe in Satan, but we anthropologists do." And it stayed in the prayer book. Somebody asked her one time, what were the first signs of civilization in a society? A student of society, they expected her to talk about the evolution of instruments that showed the development of more and more civilization. Margaret Mead said the first sign of emerging civilization was a healed femur. In early society, she said, if a person could not hunt or gather, a broken leg would automatically mean his or her death. But a healed femur meant that someone had to care for the injured person, not just the leg. Had to touch that person, bring food for the person, take time away from their other activities to care for the person. So Margaret Mead's answer was, she said, compassion is the first sign of civilization. My son's wife's grandmother died last week, a survivor of the Holocaust. So we sat Shiva with our expanded family, our Jewish Christian family, this week. So many wonderful stories were told about Aranka, Ari. She lived in Los Angeles, and she loved the Los Angeles Symphony. And so she would drive down. Being a woman who didn't have a lot of resources, she would take her own sandwich and eat it by that wonderful fountain, there in the music center before she would go in for the symphony. And then she began to realize that there were homeless people there. So she decided to bring extra sandwiches and give them to her sisters and brothers in the human family who were homeless. First it was a sack of sandwiches, and then it became a basket of sandwiches, and then a cake. The point is, she was touching people when her heart was breaking, and it created a healing and a change in the lethal absence of hope in the world. What breaks your heart? As a follower of Jesus, as a follower of the person who said, I don't care about sacrifice, what I care about compassion is about compassion. Go and learn what that means. all compassion, no sacrifice. What's breaking your heart when you read the paper, when you watch the news, when you listen to the radio, when you see someone on the street? God is working through all of us in very different ways because God has a huge job to heal the lethal absence of hope in the world. Compassion is not about some kind of spectator sport. It's got to be participatory compassion. It's got to be compassion that leads you to touch someone, to enter someone's life, to be used by the Spirit of God to heal the sick and raise the dead. The organizing center of the universe is boundless compassion. You can call it God, you can call it kindness, you can call it the beloved, you can call it boundless compassion. I don't care what you call it, but what is there at the center of the entire complexity and beauty of the universe is compassion. God, whose heart is breaking for us and the human family, and every time you and I have our heart broken, it is God hooking up with us. God inviting us to hook up with God. God saying, I have no hands but yours. I have no arms but yours. I have no intervention of hope but yours. We were in the Rector's Forum this morning, and if you weren't there, please go online to listen to this multi-billionaire who's left his job and has joined the 50% club. He's going to give 50% of his money away, and he's spending the rest of his life on what he says is the biggest challenge of our generation: climate issues and crisis. The challenge by which your and my moral life will be evaluated. Whatever you do, my brothers and sisters, have your hearts broken, and then act on that for whomever is marginalized in the world. If you do that, you will be part of God's project of healing the lethal absence of hope in the world. Amen.